All right. What is up, everyone? Time to start this broadcast. Let's kick it off with a bang. So, first thing we'll go over is we'll kind of look at what's going on in terms of the fear and greed index and all of that. Right now, we were at a 75 last week when I streamed, and this week we are down to 70. So it's down a little bit as Bitcoin's remained sideways. And as it's struggling, interestingly enough, as Bitcoin's struggling to hold above that new clean number right here. So ultimately, these end up being numbers that essentially hold us back from being able to break through big barriers. I think the whole crypto market cap is at 2 trillion. So it's kind of a pretty big deal once we get past this number. So I'm assuming that that's probably what's keeping us down. Like I said a few weeks back too, it's just this 52K zone is a pretty choppy area. It's pretty nasty. So that's why we're seeing a lot of problems in terms of Bitcoin being able to get past this zone. We'll go over what's going on and why in a little bit and what the market looks like and ultimately all of that stuff. But when we look at ultimately what the weeks look like, ETH actually started going on a little bit of a run. So ETH is actually up over the last 7 days with Bitcoin being down. We've seen actually BNB start to go a little bit as well, which was quite interesting. Other things that are running, Tron seems to consistently run. Uniswap just announced today that their V4 is about to come out. They're going to bring fees back to their holders. So that was a pretty big drive for Uni that's still kind of going up 63% in 7 days. We had the daily candle close just a little bit ago, so we're still seeing it drive up. Polygon's actually doing real well. We actually saw news that Reddit added it to their balance sheet. I grabbed this in Dudes Labs a couple times, and so we're actually up fairly well on Polygon. So Polygon's been in the news, been doing well. Filecoin's been on a run. It was up 37% in the last 7 days. It's retraced a little bit, but it had a decent run so far. We're looking at a lot of other things that are in the AI realm. It's something you have to pay attention to is when you look at NVIDIA, as NVIDIA pumps and as NVIDIA goes nuts, data associated coins like DPIN and AI are going to pump with it. So playing on that trend, we grabbed Render in the low fives in Dudes Labs, and we were up like 70% in 5 days because of that. The Graph, another data-based aggregation tool, 36%. So a lot of these typically do well. Like when we go into the actual AI category, there's a category for AI and DPIN. And so you kind of want to recognize what performs well. So we've got Render, which has just been absolutely phenomenal this bull run. We've got the Graph, which is up. We've got AGIX Singularity, which is another huge one, up 93% in 7 days, just went ballistic. A Cash Network, 12%. We've got FET, which is 45%. Like the favorite assets in this category so far have really been Render. The Graph's done quite well. AGIX, AKT, FET, all have done exceptionally well. Ocean Protocol, got Golem. Like you can't go wrong with AI at this point. Like in Dudes Labs, we bought Tau at 300, I think, and this thing went nuts. So a lot of these are things to look at. I think Becker said this one was one of his favorites. PAL, 200 million market cap. So there's a lot of room for growth. Same thing with Tau, or not Tau. So when we look at these, you kind of want to go through here and say, okay, well, if the big leaders are pumping, what does something similar? And you can start to come down here and form your own thesis based on that and find things that are smaller if you're interested in diving into kind of the smaller caps. Like you look at AGI, 107%, 115 mil market cap. So it could go quite a long ways up. Aleph.im. I grabbed that in Dudes Labs. I originally bought this at 9 cents, so it's up 87 mil market cap, which means this thing has a lot of room to run. So stuff like that is what we kind of want to look at if we're looking at things to jump into. For me, I kind of want to be in things that haven't had a bull market yet, like Palm, 242% up, 33 million market cap. But for me, I want to be in things that haven't had a bull market yet because there's not going to be a lot of bag holders holding it down. So as I go through this, I kind of want to pay attention to what's new and kind of what's hot. Go to their socials, pay attention to the project. Is it something real? Is it just a scam? It doesn't really matter. Basically, in a bull run, it doesn't matter if it's a scam. It matters if it has hype, and it matters if people are paying attention to it. And that's ultimately what we want. Because ultimately, for me, I don't want to hold this through a bear market, become a bag holder. I want to get something that's going to push, and then I can get out of fairly well. So when we look at that, we've got AI that's done just exceptionally well. The other one that's a pretty good category is DPIN. Let's see if I can find it. Maybe they just combined them because DPIN was a category previously. Yeah, well, I don't see. I think they combine DPIN with AI. Anyway, if you find it on here, let me know. But AI has been really popular. Gaming's seen a little bit of a resurgence. Not now, but we've seen like Beam's been absolutely just amazing in its uptrend. Mutable X has looked really good this season. And dudes, we bought eGold when it was like $32. A lot of these are looking pretty solid. So we kind of go through here and figure out, okay, which games are pumping. We've got Zai, kind of go down. Magic's been a favorite of mine so far. Heroes of Mavia's everything's pretty much down. But we look at like what looks good after a catastrophic day in the market. So it hasn't been good. It's been down only. But we look Guild5 15% up, YGG 2% up in 7 days. What are they like in a day? Okay, they're some of these are bouncing decently well, some of these aren't. So we kind of want to pay attention to that. And obviously, the smaller the cap, the more likely it is it's not going to bounce well. And then we can start looking at the charts and seeing, okay, what makes sense for us right now. ERC 404, there's a couple in here like Pandora obviously had a huge pump. ASTX has been just basically up only. There's a lot of newer kind of things to pay attention to as well in terms of what's moving well. Solana ecosystem, Sol looks like absolute trash, but when we look at some other things, like let's find Shadow. We bought Shadow in Dudes Labs when it was like 80 cents. Wherever it is, it's somewhere down here. But it looks really good. It had a great pump today. We'll see if the entire thing gets erased with Bitcoin just being an absolute trash. Let's just search for it. Shadow token. It started to break out today, which I thought was pretty interesting. So it's $1.41. In Dudes, we bought this at like 80 cents, 85 cents, something like that. But today it actually just all of a sudden it broke that. It was stuck at that $1.10 barrier. And I was kind of waiting for it to pick up more to break that. And now it's finally broken through it and it's actually held decently well. So if it can close the weekly up here, I'm probably inclined to grab some more because I mean, we're looking at a 226 million market cap. It's a data aggregating coin, similar to like Filecoin, similar to like Render, similar to a lot of those DPIN AI style coins. So it has a ton of potential and it's in the Solana network. So I think it's one that's going to move quite well. But let me see if we have any questions so far. If you have any questions, what's up? First time listening. Good to have you. Make sure you subscribe and like the broadcast so that way I know that you're here. If you're following this in Twitter, go and retweet the broadcast. Can I please look at Cody? Yeah, I'll take a look at that towards the end. Made a huge mistake shorting. Yeah, I typically don't. If you watch what I do, I don't ever short in a bull market unless I start seeing like major divergences. Typically, I don't even touch the short button. What's up, Ken? All right, let's go back. I'll take a look at those coins towards the end, but let's take a look. So far, what looks good? The indexes look pretty good. So when we go over here and we look at stocks, like SPY looks great. Pretty much everything except crypto or Bitcoin looks good. Like you look at SPY on the weekly, just what a monster weekly. As soon as Nvidia earnings were done, the market got permission to finally move again. So now we saw a pretty monstrous drive up again, and SPY finally breaking out and seeing some volume coming back in. When we look at today, ultimately Fridays typically are the days you get absolutely dumped on. So Friday and then straight down, but ultimately they don't look bad when we look at the indexes on like the higher time frames. There's some divergences and stuff developing on the daily, could be a potential problem. Ultimately, this results in this coming back down to the 50 to test at some point. It's in a bull market, so it's hard to tell when that'll happen. It still looks good on the 3-day, nothing major developed. Still looks good on the weekly. Same thing with QQQ. So NASDAQ, none of these are actually in a horrible position. This is kind of looking at a little bit of a triple top, which could be a problem, but still no major divergences or anything developed on the weekly. On the 3-day, it's getting pretty close. On the daily, it had a clean bounce off the 50, which should invalidate those divergences. So we'll see what happens in the next couple of weeks on that. When we look at NVIDIA, this one, its earnings went fantastic. So earnings were good, which gave the market permission to essentially pump again. Then on the daily, we had a kind of a red day, but overall not horrible. So it's kind of where I'm at with that. We picked up some of the Bitcoin Trust ETF, the IBIT. So I think I grabbed it at like mid 27s. So it's coming back down. I would anticipate if Bitcoin keeps just doing what it's doing, it's going to come back to this daily and retest kind of our entry zone. So we'll see where it goes from there. When we move into crypto, Bitcoin dominance actually is trending down. So Bitcoin dominance losing the daily. Looking at the weekly, it's actually coming down pretty hard. So it's been sort of, this zone is where it's been stuck at, this 53.91%. So that's kind of where it's stuck at right now. When we look at the ETH BTC chart on the weekly, it rejected off the 50 before, but now it's coming back through, which is interesting because we'll talk about ETH in a second. But if it can confirm over here, we could potentially see ETH finally make its run. When we look at Bitcoin over here, it doesn't quite look great. So we have a little bit of a divergence developing, especially if we close at this rate. It's going to confirm unless all of a sudden we go up only. But right now, this is putting us in a place of sort of concern. And where I would say this leads us to, I mean, first point of attack, which we've already kind of hit today for Bitcoin, would be this weekly trend. So we're sitting right here above it. We wicked off it a little bit. It's slightly green, but we've only been alive in this daily candle for like an hour. So we'll hopefully see. I would anticipate, because I mean, this is a weak bounce so far, but I would anticipate if we bounce off this, we come back up and we test here. And if we lose this, we come straight back down and we go to 49,310 and we just sit in this range. Then we test it again and we come back down. So ultimately, that's what I'd be looking at. I think I mean, this was the first zone that I said we were probably going to test in Dude's Lab, 50,535. Second zone we test is 49,332. We start losing those. And then we start seeing bigger dumps down to like the 46s, 43s. But when we come and look at the 4 hour, kind of coincides with that 49,742. Losing this is significant. We lost the 4 hour trend. Now we're kind of sitting under. Now we're coming up to revenge test this 50,977, reject off that, and it puts us cleanly right back here, which coincides with where the daily trend is sitting here at the bottom. So then we'd hope and pray that we get a decent bounce off of there, which could essentially invalidate like a weekly divergence if it can just go up. If it goes like this, if it stays here and if it goes down and up again, then we've got a problem. So it's kind of where Bitcoin's looking at. With ETH, though, on the other hand, what's interesting about ETH is it was building a divergence here and it actually came through and it's invalidated. If it closes the weekly up here and doesn't just go straight down, then it's going to invalidate this divergence, which also coincides with this ETH BTC pump and this weekly starting to cross over this 50. If that doesn't get rejected, and if this can invalidate this divergence, then what we could potentially see is ETH finally being able to go on its run. When we look at ETH and how I've mapped it out, we're sitting here at this like 0.5 fib zone. So what I would anticipate if it can go on a run, which it's tried, that ETH pushes up to the 3,336 zone. From there, maybe a little bit of a rejection could send us all the way back, but then push back up to the 4,000 zone. I mean, ultimately pushing to the 4,000 would be the ideal zone for ETH for now. So I think we go from here and we push into that zone if we can confirm and ETH finally gets to go on a run. Another thing that kind of confirms, or I guess gives us supportive evidence towards that, is when we look on the weekly on some of the ETH DeFi alts, like Maker isn't a good example, but let's go down. Everybody always asks about Sol. Look at the weekly, looks like absolute trash. So it's just straight down, straight down. I mean, it's developing weekly divergences and literally falling apart. It needs to hold 100. Otherwise, I think we come back down. We visit 88 and potentially visit like the 77 zone. Actually, maybe let's see where we're at up here. Yeah, that puts us down to like 87 as our first zone on Sol. But when we start looking at the weekly on, like Comp went crazy today. It finally pushed. Comp, no divergences. Looks good on the weekly. Interesting. ETH DeFi. Nothing on Eagle. That's not ETH DeFi. Another one people ask about, TIA. Does not look good. It looks like it's probably going to continue plummeting, but it is getting close to a bounce on the 50 on the 3-day. ENS had a big run. Let's find some other ones that look decent. Uni actually pumped like crazy today. Uni invalidated any sort of divergence and just completely wicked off of that weekly. I mean, I would wait for a pullback on Uni to maybe like the 10.5, $11 zone if it doesn't just keep moving straight up, and then it might be a good play. So Render obviously has been up only. DYDX started to push today, which was interesting. It used to be ETH. I think DYDX has moved to Cosmos now, though, but it had a really nice bounce off of this 50. So now it's put us in a zone to where DYDX has the strength to potentially start moving back up and put itself into a good position for a run. So for me, if I was looking at this one, I'd probably shift to the 4 hour, wait for some continuation, see what happens here, see if it starts going sideways, and see if it can hold this 4 hour trend, probably around 3.23 and like 3.17. And then that would be a beautiful entry. SNX, another good one. I talked about this previously. I said that it had a really, really good weekly. So when we look at SNX, and it actually had a great wick this week, but it hit, bounced off the 50 and started pushing. So now SNX isn't a good point to potentially run, and that's an ETH DeFi coin. So another decent one that I think has some potential here with ETH starting to look great. LDO today, it looks like it erased everything, but it was looking good. So it's still got kind of a divergence that's developing. Interesting thing too here is like the L2s don't look that good. Like Optimism has a rejection. Optimism still has some divergences to play out. Let's see what else. Sushi was another one that started to look decent today. So it had a double bounce off that 50 or pretty close to the 50 on the weekly, pushed itself back up. So this could be a potential play here as well. We're starting to see pretty decent updrive here on the weekly, which leads us to like 248. When we look at the 4 hour today, it's holding decently well, reasonably well, especially with Bitcoin kind of falling apart. So this could be another one to catch on the 4 hour trend. ARB doesn't look good. So that's what, like I said, interestingly, L2s aside from Matic aren't looking so good. So this has a divergence developing. It's probably going to come back down and test this 50. Matic. Matic's actually been decently well. So when we look at the weekly, Matic's kind of fighting just a triple top on the RSI here. So if Matic cannot reject here and start pushing back up, puts Matic in a pretty good zone to start pumping to that 113, 118 zone. So let's kind of see how that plays out. When we look at the 4 hour today, every time it's tried to move, it just gets shut down, but it's holding. So it did kind of fall through on the 4 hour here, tried to take off, got rejected, fell through, but pushed all the way back up. And now it's not in a horrible zone. So all we need to do on the weekly for Matic, and we bought this in Dudes Labs, like I said, somewhere around like 86 cents, something like that. But it puts Matic in a pretty good zone to start pressuring back up. All right, continuing our quest of what's working or what's looking good and what's not. We got CRV starting to cross over on the weekly. So rejected, fell through, starting to cross over. We'll go into AI coins in a second, but AI coins like Render, FET's just a monster. It actually bounced off the 50. So it had this downtrend and then it bounced off the 50 on the RSI, started pushing back up. So now it's sitting there in a decent size uptrend. It's massively up. When we look at FET, we would have hoped that it would have hold this 4 hour. It didn't, which tells me that we're probably going to come back and test. I mean, it's losing the EMA 100 too, so we probably come back and test like the 94s, which would be a pretty good zone for FET. Ocean, same thing, losing here, probably comes back down and tests down here, which probably means that it's lost the 4 hour. Yeah, so pretty much the same zone for that one. See, everyone always asks about Say, so we'll cover that. When we look at Say, it doesn't look great on the weekly. So not a lot of data on the weekly, but we do have some divergences developing, coming straight down. This could lead it to bounce off the 50 on the RSI. Def not holding the 4 hour trend. I would anticipate we get some sort of decent bounce right here. All right. GRT, same thing, losing the 4 hour trend, which means we can probably anticipate GRT comes back down and around the 24-cent zone. Let's see, what else do we have here? Who else has some coins? Let's see what the coins were. Can I talk more about the macro market? Yeah, when you say macro, like BTC, ETH, or like just the market as a whole, the stocks included, let me know. Let's go into, we already looked at SNX. Let's go into AI. So Render, a lot of these AI coins went crazy with NVIDIA's earnings going super well, but they're all looking pretty much similar now. We can expect a test down to here, 6.96, see what happens there. We can test it. Probably anticipate a test down to here now, so 0.95. Yeah, like that 0.95 zone. A lot of them are losing those 4-hour trends, which isn't good. Almost every one of them. AGIX is the only one that's close. If it can bounce off of this zone, then it's probably in a good place. Ocean lost it, so probably can anticipate a test right back to like this zone, 0.68. Powell never, I don't know if it didn't really push that hard. Powell's in a downtrend, so it's kind of waiting. We're below the 50 in the RSI. WorldCoin losing its 4-hour, on top of its 4-hour. If it can hold this, we see a bounce. If we can't, then we come back down and we probably coming in. First stop 7.53, second stop 6.53. AI, Aleph, a lot of these are, Aleph doesn't look good. A lot of these are losing their trends. This actually had a decent bounce. Looking at the 4-hour, that's a good wick. Came all the way back down and got completely sucked up. Now it's revenge testing. And if it clears this, it's going to come back up and test the 36 zone. All right, let's take a look at some of the coins. Coty. Oh, 11% up. Wow. It's on the move. Yeah, did you say you shorted this? Oh yeah, man. I hope you set a stop loss because that looks like a squeeze. It looks like some shorts got liquidated. So what I'm looking at here is it broke resistance. So notice how it's been pressuring this. So pressure, 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 break. And then just goes absolutely bonkers. So as it pressures, it breaks, bounced off the RSI on the 50, gave it the strength to push through. So that was a pretty big break for it. So when I look at this one macro, I mean, geez, bounce off the fit with a weekly, geez, this thing's, I mean, if it doesn't come back through 12.170, this thing's probably going ham. Man, I mean, when we look at this guy, probably a lot of room to move too. It's hard to predict where it'll actually go, but like if we just do a simple measurement, it's still in the red from where it absolutely catastrophically died. So, I mean, it wouldn't be surprised me to see 0.2461. I would definitely not be shorting this. If I actually wanted to enter this, which it's a pretty strong play, I would let it just keep pumping and then I would enter off of a retest of the 4-hour. So I would wait for these two 4-hour bands to catch up and then I would come in. It's probably going to be like somewhere around here, maybe right here, probably that zone, somewhere in that zone, maybe. We'll see where it goes. Looks like it's starting to slow down a little bit. So we'll see if this can catch up and it can kind of bounce off. But that's kind of what I would look at with that. That's a monster. W buy, someone puts. Is that a coin? Let's see. Wrapped Balance AI. Well, let's see. Does not look good on the 4-hour. RSI is below 50, lost the trend. Looks pretty bad on the daily. No information on the weekly. 3-day, no, nothing really. So we can go off the daily. Doesn't really look great. I anticipate we come back down and we test this daily trend. I mean, it's probably going to test right here. If it bounces off this, then it's bullish and it'll keep moving. If it doesn't, then we fall back through. So that's kind of what I'd be looking at the 12-hour. Losing the 12-hour. We have a little bit of data here. So if it loses this, we probably anticipate, and if it loses this, which is the daily trend, we probably anticipate a fall to 6.96. So that's kind of where I'd be looking at with that. Macro as a whole, like I said, Bitcoin's not, it doesn't look great. It's losing its 12-hour trend. It's starting to lose a lot of its good trends. It's sitting on top of the daily. Doesn't really look like it has a good bounce. Probably anticipate we come down to the 49,363. See if we drive. The 48,627 was a pretty big break, so I'd anticipate a bounce there. But if we keep losing those zones, then Bitcoin probably comes back down to, like I said, this zone right here as a first test. And then, but what's interesting is ETH The only bad thing is ETH is losing its 4-hour trend. So if ETH kind of can't sustain this, then ETH probably comes back down to these zones too, like 753. But what's interesting on the weekly for ETH is it actually looks significantly better. So it's invalidating these divergences. And if it doesn't collapse and die and fall straight through and can close up here, then ETH is probably in a better position than Bitcoin to run. Obviously, if Bitcoin catastrophically collapses, everything's going down. But if it can sit sideways, then it gives ETH an opportunity to run in a lot of the ETH DeFi coins. So macro as a whole, for me, Bitcoin doesn't necessarily look great. It doesn't look like it's going anywhere up, but ETH looks good. If Bitcoin can maintain or sit sideways for a period of time, then I think we have an opportunity to see an ETH-led run finally. So what I'm anticipating for Bitcoin is a test to here. We've already tested it once. We're coming right. It looks like we're going to come right back down and test this. Remember, we have a low volume weekend, so nothing matters until Monday when the U.S. stock market opens. But I'd anticipate we come back down, we retest this 50,497 zone, and we probably come back down and test the 49,310 zone. I anticipate that's where we go in terms of Bitcoin, which is going to coincide with the daily bouncing off the 50. So macro, Bitcoin, not great. Macro, ETH, actually looking decently better than it has, which could potentially put us in a place for ETH to actually start running. When we look at stocks are looking good. We've got some decent moves in stocks. They don't look like they're slowing down either. So that's pretty much it. Let me know if that's helpful. If that's helpful, let me know if you're in the Dudes Lab server and you're watching this and this is helpful. Just give me some fire emojis. Let me know what you found helpful about the broadcast. If you saw this on Twitter, make sure you like and subscribe to the broadcast and retweet the tweet that I put out that shared this. So hope you all have a great day, and I'll